Hey guys, today we're installing an ARC Audio MPAK on a 2020 Streetglide. All 2014 and up Streetglide MPAKs come with our Moto 720 amplifier. Also included is the Moto 602 V2 speakers, the HD FH 2014 harness. This is a plug-and-play harness. It's all in one kit. Everything you need is in this bag. And if you chose it as an optional item, the PSM, that will be also in your MPAK kit. A 2014 and up Streetglide is a fairly simple install. So the first thing we're going to do is remove the seat, and in order to do that, we're going to go and take this bag off so we can access the bolt for the strap. So all you do right here, open up the bag. You guys all know how to do this. There's two bolts on the inside. Loosen those. Drop those in there. Make sure you got the bag caught. All you do is tilt it towards you, lift up, and that's it. Now that we've got the bag off, let's get the seat off. There's two screws we have to take off. You'll just need a number 2 Phillips to get those. The first one's right here, and the other one's right on the back of the seat. The strap is just looped into a little bracket right here. You just pull the loop right out and swing it over to the other side of the seat, and it'll be out of your way. All you do here now is just lift up on the back of the seat, and you're just going to pull towards the back of the bike. And that'll get your seat off. All right, guys, next thing we're going to do is we're going to take the tank off. There's a couple steps involved to do that. First thing we're going to do is we've got to release this breather hose right here. In order to get to the little zip tie, we're going to go ahead and take this little side cover off. This is just snapped on. You just grab it and pull. It's in 3 spots. Pull here, and then grab the last one down on the bottom. And it comes right off. All right, what we're going to do now is we're going to take the tank off, and in order to do that, you got a few hoses and clips to remove. We're going to start with this hose right here. It's got a little zip tie down here that we already undid. We're going to pull that hose up, and it comes out right here. You can just leave that hanging to the side. All right, we got this hose right here. It's a rigid hose connected to a soft hose. This one, literally all you do is you just grab them and you pull them apart, and they come apart, and you're good to go there. All right, we got a couple connectors right here that we're going to need to remove when we're working with the battery in the tank. So I'm going to go ahead and use the pry tool, panel removal tool, and we're going to go ahead and pull those off. You just grab them in right here. Gently pull, and they just pop right up. You got the gray one also. Grab that, and they just pop up. A little quick tip, when you go to put these back, the plastic plate they mount to is actually labeled black and gray. So the gray will snap in where the gray is labeled. The black will snap in where the black is labeled. All right, so right here, it's just a little Molex connector. You just grab it, push and pull. That's that. So you got this one off, you got this one off, you got this one off. Now your tank is released. The only thing left to do is get the 4 bolts off. All right, before we unbolt the tank, what we need to do is remove the fuel line. It's a quick release connector right here on the left side of the tank. Put a little yellow rag under it. You're gonna have a couple drops of fuel. Don't worry about that. Put your finger underneath, push up a little, grab this, push up, and the fuel line will come loose underneath. Right there. A couple drops. Go ahead and wipe that up. And you're good to go. The tank is held on by 4 1/2-inch bolts. We got 2 in the back and 2 in the front. We're going to go ahead and remove the 2 rear ones first. Just using a regular ratchet with a 1/2 inch. These aren't torqued very tight, so they come off fairly easily. On the front bolts, you got little plastic covers right here. We're just going to go ahead and pull those off. You do the same thing on both sides. Once the cover pops off, you go ahead and get the bolt. You got to use an extension on that. It's also a 1/2 inch. Okay, now that we have all the 4 bolts off and the hoses are disconnected, we're going to go ahead and lift off the tank. You just grab it from the side and underside, just lift straight up, and the tank will just come right off the bike. You really don't want the tank resting on the connector, so what I like to do is just use some of that packaging out of the MPAK box and just rest the tank on that so there's no stress on your quick connector. All right, the next thing we're going to be doing now is there's 7 T27 Torx screws on here that we have to take off to get the front of the fairing off. That's the next thing we'll be doing. So we're going to start on this side right here. Keep in mind when you take these out that there's a shorter one and a longer one. The shorter one you remove from the bottom, the longer one is on top, and it's going to be the same thing on the other side. All right, before we proceed with anything on the front of the fairing, it's always best to take care of your fender and protect it with a proper fender cover. All right, now that the fender is protected, we'll go ahead and continue removing the fairing. We've got to start with these 3 T27s on top that are holding the windshield. I do the center one last, just so that at that point you can grab the windshield and the fairing. Keep in mind right here that the center one is a little longer and the 2 end ones are shorter. Just keep that in mind. The windshield will just lift off the top right now, so you can just grab the fairing and then lift the windshield straight up, set that to the side. All right, what we're going to do now is remove the fairing off the bike. The only thing holding it to the bike right now are the 2 wires going to the headlights. All right, there's two headlight wires right here. There's a low beam and a high beam, and it's just as simple as pinch the connector, pull back. Same thing with the other one. When you go to put them back on, just keep in mind the low beam was the top one. Okay, keep in mind on the 2020 and newer bikes, Harley has introduced a new module called a telemetrics control unit. You won't find this in the 2019 and older bikes, but this is something that will have to be removed and relocated, and that's what we're going to do now. So the telemetrics control unit, also known as the TCU, is mounted to a plate, which is then mounted to another plate. And on this plate, there's also 3 harnesses connected to it that we're going to need to remove now with the panel remover tool. First one's over here, off on the left side of the bike. Get that one off. There's another one here right in front of the TCU. Get that one off. And then one over here on the other side of the TCU. And we get that one off. Okay, so the TCU is held onto this bracket with 4 T25 screws. In order to get the TCU off, we will also have to remove the upper vent. Okay, so the vent is held in place by 2 T27 screws. There's one over here on this side and one right over here on the other side. We're going to need to take those out to get the vent out to access the screws to the TCU. Once you've got the screws out, the vent will just slide out the front, like so. Okay, now that we've got the vent out, we can get access to the 4 T25 screws that are holding the TCU in place. Now we can remove the TCU. Okay, the TCU is mounted to its bracket with 2 T25 screws. We're going to remove the bracket and not reuse it, but the TCU will be retained, and we're going to relocate that in the fairing. All right, so now we've got our location where our amplifier is going to go. If you have a 2019 or older bike, most likely when you take off your fairing, this is what it's already going to look like. So you'll be jumping ahead to our next steps. So now what we're going to do is jump back to the battery so we can make our power and ground connections for our amplifier and our PSM. All right, so what our goal here is to ultimately get this cover off, the battery cover. So before we do that, we're going to go ahead and remove the computer module. It's a little lever right here. You just flip that back. This will lift off, and you just want to grab it and tuck it off to the side so it's out of your way while we're working down here. There's 2 1/2-inch bolts right here that we need to remove to get this cover off. All right, so now we got the bolts removed off the battery cover. There's a little component right here that you can just slide off to the side and lift off and get that out of your way. And now to get this cover off, we're going to lift up, push forward, and then lift up again to remove it from the bike. There you go. All right, now that we got the battery cover lifted off the battery, this last module is connected to it. We need to get that off. What you do is you're going to put your little pry tool right here, and it's locked on right here. So you're just going to put it on, twist it, and it'll slide right out. And at that point, your battery cover is off the bike. All right, so what we got here is our power and ground cable that came out of the HDFH 2014 bag, and is our power and ground cable for the PSM that came out of the PSM box. All right, so what we're going to do now is run our power and ground cables up from the battery to the front of the bike. In order to do that, we're going to pop this plastic cover off of here and we're going to run our wires along with all the other factory wires. To remove this cover, Harley has a zip tie right here that we need to clip off, and then 2 pieces of tape that we need to cut off, and then we'll get the cover off. To save yourself some time, it really isn't necessary to take the cover all the way off. Just unclip it on one side, and all you need to do is just take the wires, tuck them in here, and then we can re-clip the cover and then just put the zip tie back on. All right, next thing we're going to do is connect the power cables, but prior to that we need to remove the fuse. All right, now we're going to make our power and ground connections using a 10mm socket. You do want to make sure your wires are routed towards the front of the bike, because once the cover comes on, the sides will wrap down and you don't want it to catch any of these wires. PSM one will come in through here. We'll lay it down. There you go, that's the first one. Leave that hanging. And then we'll follow up with the amplifier power wire. All right, included with the HDFH 2014 is a large piece of Velcro that's used to mount the amplifier and the fairing. What we're going to do is we're going to cut 2 squares out of this so that we can use it to relocate the TCU under the fairing and to attach the PSM off to the side. The next thing that we're going to do is go ahead and remove both of the speaker pods. We're going to get these out, and then we're going to drop in our new speakers, and then we'll put those pods back in before we go and mount the amplifier and everything else. These pods are held on with several screws and bolts. We're going to start off with the 3 bolts that are down low inside here on this side and on this side. These are 7/16 inch. We're going to use a 3/8 inch ratchet with extensions on it and a 7/16 inch universal joint. That's going to be the best way to get in there and get those out. The best technique to use here is to come in at a wide angle. If you're trying to come in from right here, you're going to have a very difficult time getting these out. Just go through the wires, come in at a wide angle, and it'll come out fairly easily. Here's a little quick tip. Put a little shop rag down here right here where your fork is. That way if you drop a bolt, you're not trying to fish it out from down underneath there. All right, on the upper pods up here, you got 2 screws on each side that you got to remove, 5/32 Allen bits. Easy way to access these is if you remove the harness for the gauges on either side, and that'll give you room for your tool. Another convenience factor is to use a 45-degree offset if you have one. If not, you'll have to go in with the screwdriver straight. Either way, you'll get it out. All right, before we take off the final 3 screws on each pod, what we need to do is remove our Molex connector here. So these are the harnesses that link the speaker to the radio. We're just going to unclip them, so that way the pods will be free when we unbolt them. The last 3 screws we need to remove to get these pods off are located right here, and right here. These are 3/16 Allen screws, and we'll get those off right now. And what you also need to do is use a panel popper and pop this one right here off and pop this one right here off. Get that, and then that's going to let you release your cigarette lighter, and that'll give you everything that you need to do to get this pod off of here. Just like that. All right, what else you also have to do right here is go ahead and same thing like the other side. Pop the panel on top, pop this one on the P&A port down here on the bottom. The clip's already out, and now your pod is ready to come out on this side. These are all T25 screws. There's 4 on each pod. Basically take those out, get the driver out, unwire it, and then we'll rewire the new driver and put it back in. Prior to putting the speakers in the pod, what we want to do is remove this rubber cosmetic piece that's around the speaker. Just simply grab the edge and just pop it right off. When you go to install, the larger connector from the factory wire will connect to the larger terminal on the speaker. The smaller connector will connect to the smaller terminal. When you go to put the speaker in the pod, you just want to rotate it around so there's no tension on the wire. Just swing it around so the wire has slack on it. And let's go ahead and screw these back on. And now we're going to go ahead and do the same thing on the other speaker. All right, what we're going to be doing next is the integration harness. This is the harness that picks up the signal from the factory radio and sends it over to the PSM, and then the return signal from the amplifier output to the speaker pods. All right, the harness has two sides to it. This side right here just has your male and female Molex connectors that are going to pick up at the pods. This side right here, one has a proprietary connector that's going to go to the input signal. Either if you're using the PSM, it'll go to the input on the PSM. If you're not using the PSM, it'll go to the input on the amplifier. The bare wires right here, these are going to be the signals coming from the amplifier going back to your speaker pods. Let's go ahead and put this in. So you'll remember when we took off the pods, we disconnected these Molex connectors. In our harness, you have the opposite side connector for that side, and you just simply plug it in. And you do the same thing on the other side. These two remaining connectors, these will be used when we go to put the pods back in. This will connect on the pod connectors. What you want to do now is just simply route the wires up so it's going to be out of the way of where the amplifier mounts in this area. So what we're going to do is we're just going to route it up across this harness and then back down. The PSM is going to be located right here. And so once we go to put that in, we'll have all our harnesses meeting right there. Okay, so you'll notice that we looped one harness around from the other side, and then we got excess length on the harness that's going to be on the PSM side. So what we're going to do is we're going to coil this up and just clean up the wires so we can have it in a little small coiled up section right here. Also included in your HDFH 2014 bag is the PNA wire. What this wire does, it acts as a remote turn-on wire for your amplifier, or if you're using the PSM, it'll be the remote turn-on for your PSM. On the 2014 and up Streetglides, the factory PNA wire is right up on top behind the voltage gauge. It has a black plug in it. We're going to pull that plug out and put our PNA wire in its place. Plug has a simple release button. You just push down on it and pull the plug out. PNA wire will only plug in one way. Just plug it right in. It'll click in place. This wire you can also route along the top and bring it down to the same hole going down to the PSM. We're going to move on next to the PSM. I'm going to show you a few of the harnesses that you're going to need to use for this. First things first, on the PSM there's a switch in the center for the auto sense. Go ahead and set that switch to off. This is the input harness that you're going to be using. This connects to the integration harness that we've already put on the bike. This is going to plug in on the left side of the PSM right here. This is our RCA output harness. This is the signal that's going to be going to the amplifier. This is going to plug into the PSM over here on the right hand side. These are a pair of barrel connectors that you'll need they're male-to-male barrel connectors, basically connecting these RCAs to the RCAs on the amplifier. And then this right here is just our USB cable that's going to be used as the tuning cable, so this will plug into your laptop. And this right here is just a weatherproof cover that's going to be used on the PSM. Next up is the amplifier, and I just want to give you an idea of what comes in the box. It's pretty basic. You get two RCA input harnesses, and you get the mounting feet. On a 2014 and up Streetglide, we will not be using the mounting feet, and we'll be using one of the RCA input harnesses for a two-speaker setup. Before we mount the amplifier, there's a few adjustments we need to make on the amplifier. In order to do that, we need to take off this top cover. It's held on by 4 Phillips #1 screws. We just take those out, pop the top cover off. In a standard application, if you're not using a PSM, this is the following settings you'd use. On the input select switch, set it to 2-channel, which is the left-hand position. Your frequency knob, set that to 110. So basically you turn the knob all the way counterclockwise, then go back to clockwise until this little slot in the knob lines up with the 110. On the crossover switch, set that in the center to high pass. The gain, this will be actually adjusted once you've got the system running, so you can have it at minimum now if you like, and then adjust up as necessary when tuning. On the output switch, flip that to the left for 4-channel stereo. Going down to the next, this is the channel 1-2 row. Same thing, the frequency is going to set to 110. The crossover switch will be set to high pass, center position. The gain again will be adjusted once tuning. And then you have an auto sense switch, and that will be set to off since you'll be using a remote turn on wire from the PNA lead. On the front edge of the amplifier where the connections are, you have 2 input select switches. We're going to flip those both to the left side for speaker level input. And you have 2 impedance switches. We're going to flip those both to the left side for 4 ohm stereo. In our case, we're using the PSM, so we're going to use the following settings on the amplifier. Top row, the input select switch, we're going to set that to 2-channel, which is the left-hand side. And then inside this box here, these are the settings for channels 3 and 4, which in our case right now we're not using, but in the future you might. So the frequency knob, turn it all the way counterclockwise. It's going to be set to 50. The crossover switch, set it to high pass, which is the middle position. The gain knob, go ahead and rotate that over to the 4th dot and leave it there. And then this is the output switch. Set that to 4-channel, which is the left-hand position. Going down to the second row, which is the controls for channels 1 and 2. Set the frequency also to 50 Hz, which is all the way counterclockwise. Set the crossover switch to high pass, which is in the middle. Set the gain over to the 4th dot. And then over here we have an auto sense switch. We're going to go ahead and turn that off since we are using a remote turn on signal coming from our PSM. On the front edge of the amplifier where the connections are, when using the PSM, you're going to set the input select switches to RCA, which is the right-hand position. So go ahead and flip those both to the right. And then on the impedance switches, go ahead and flip those to the left. We're going to set those to 4 ohm. At this point, we're going to put the top plate back on. And we're going to go ahead and move the amplifier and install it on the bike. Okay, now we're going to wire up the PSM. This is the PSM power wire harness that we routed to the front of the bike earlier. There's 2 wires on here you don't need. There's a gray and orange wire. You can clip those right off. The only ones you're going to need are the blue and the red. The red wire is going to connect to your red PNA wire that you ran down earlier. The blue wire is going to connect to your amplifier's turn-on lead. When using the PSM with the integration harness, you will only need the channel 1 and 2 input connector. So if you look at the connector with the tab on top, the channel 1 and 2 is the one on the left. The green and purple in the middle and the gray and white on the right will go unused. You can fold those back. Quick tip for you, on the connectors that are being unused, either heat shrink them or electrical tape them. That way they don't make contact with metal, causing any type of feedback. What we're going to do now is we're going to install the PSM. And a quick tip here is that you want to install the PSM before you put this pod back in, because you can just access where it's going to go from the side right here. If you've got the pod back in already, you're going to be trying to squeeze this thing in from the front. Before attaching the PSM to the mounting surface, just be sure to wipe it down and make sure it's clean and dust free. The PSM will sit back about 1.5 inches from the front edge, and it will line up with the right edge. So how you can do it is you can just kind of set one side down right there with the right edge, and then just tilt it over so the other side adheres. Press down on it a little bit, and then that Velcro will hold it in place. Now we're going to go ahead and attach the dust cover and the harnesses. Keep in mind the dust cover is grooved on 3 edges, and that lines up with the top and the 2 sides of the PSM. At this point, you can connect the red PNA wire to the red wire on the PSM power harness with the supplied butt connector. Now we're ready to connect the harnesses to the PSM and install the dust cover. With the excess wires tucked away, the remaining wires coming off your PSM now are the channel 1 and 2 input, the blue remote turn on output, and the channel 1 and 2 RCA output. Next, we're going to connect the integration harness to the speaker level input harness on the PSM. So we're going to line up the bottom edge of the Velcro with the front edge of this metal plate right here. We'll just set it on the inside, and you basically want to center it right among the center line of the radio right here. Now that the Velcro is installed, we're ready to install the amp. When attaching the Velcro pad to the amplifier, just go ahead and center it on the amplifier with equal sides exposed on both sides, and be sure to leave your serial number exposed. Make sure when you lay the amp down that your Velcro lines up. A good way to look for it is just keep equal gaps right here on the edges and line the front edge of the amp with the front edge of the metal plate, and then just set it down. press down a little bit, and it'll hold it in its place. You might think that this Velcro is not going to be strong enough to hold it, but trust us, this thing is plenty strong. Okay, now we're going to make the wiring connections to the front of the amplifier. On the power and ground leads, you're going to need to strip off 1/2 inch of the protective jacket. Connect the red wire to the terminal labeled 12 volt. You will need a 1/8 inch Allen key to do that. Connect the black wire to the terminal labeled G and D, which stands for ground. You want to leave enough slack on the power and ground wire so that there's no tension on it when the handlebars are being rotated left to right. This little extra wire, you can go ahead and tuck it in to the fairing. Take one of the RCA wires that shipped with the amplifier and connect it to the channel 1 and 2 input. Use the barrel connectors that ship with the PSM to connect the PSM output RCA to the amplifier input RCA. Match the colors. Be sure to use heat shrink or electrical tape to cover over the exposed metal. Use a 1/8 inch precision screwdriver to make the remote turn on and the speaker connections. Make your speaker connections based on the color of the wire that's on either side of the pod. Our gray is on the left, so we'll put that on channel 1, which is the left. Keep in mind, the wire that's solid gray is your positive, the one with the white stripe is negative. The wire that's solid white is positive, the one with the black stripe is negative. To clean things up a bit, you can zip tie these wires here off to the side. Some of the few things that we pointed out to you earlier about these speakers. The Moto 602s, they use an accordion surround for an intended purpose. The reason being is that when this pod goes and mounts inside the fairing here, this grill comes up right up on the speaker. And doing an accordion surround like that keeps the speaker from rubbing on the grill. Now that the speaker wires are done, that wraps up all the wiring. So before we button up the fairing, what we want to do is go back to the back, connect the fuses, and test to see if everything works okay. All right, prior to putting everything back together here, first thing we need to do is put the fuses in, then we're going to go do a test out front. Small spark, if you see it or hear it, don't worry about it, it's inevitable. All right, we're good there. Let's go back and see if everything works okay. All right, what we're going to do now is put the bike in accessory position, and at this time, everything should come on. The PSM will come on with 2 amber LEDs. Those LEDs are underneath the rubber cover, so you will have to pull it back just to verify. Then the amp will flash a series of green lights and then go to a steady green. If it goes to a steady green, we know everything's good, and you should be able to hear some static on your audio. Let's go and turn it on. All right, we got a steady green, so it looks like everything's good there. We'll turn it up a little here. You can hear a little bit of static on the radio right there. There's no signal going through this, so it's just static right now. All right, we're going to go and turn it back off, and now we can start buttoning away the wires. All right, guys, now that we're done with the speaker wires, the last wire to connect is the USB cable for tuning. This cable will not be staying in the bike permanently. We'll be taking it back out after tuning, and you can do the same. It's located right below the RCA output wire, so when you locate that, just pull the rubber flap back and plug it in right there. Once you're done tuning and everything, you can go ahead and power off, unplug the wire, and you won't need to leave it with the bike. All right, guys, what we're going to do now is put everything back together at the battery in reverse order. So what we're going to do is the battery cover first. What you need to do is take this little harness right here, slip it back on where we removed it originally. We'll just click in place. Then what you're going to do is putting the battery cover back on, it's going to be the same gesture. So you're going to move it forward a little, drop it down, swing it back, it'll hook in place, then set the backside down. Just like that, pull it back, and then that's set. All right, your two fuses, what you'll do with that is you got a nice little spot right here. It's kind of empty. Tuck the yellow one down in there first. It'll just tuck away off to the side. And then what you do with the black one, the big one for the red wire, is just put that right over here off to the side. It'll perfectly clear the seat, the battery, and everything else. And you can just leave it right over here on the side. All right, like we said at the beginning of the video, make sure the black one connects back to where it's labeled black on the tray. And then the gray one, once it connects to the tank, will connect back down to the gray one. All right, once you got the battery situated, guys, the next thing to do is just get your tank put on. We'll do the tank, side cover, saddlebag, then the seat. All right, once you set your tank down, what you can do is just lift up on the back a little. You're going to slide it forward until the tabs line up with the holes in the frame. Now we got the bolt holes lined up. Let's go ahead and attach the tank, and then we'll make the connections after. Put everything in kind of loose for now until we get the front ones in. Then we'll come back and torque everything down. All right, guys, don't forget to put your tank cap covers back on the front. These are side specific, so the side that points out further, that will sit up. So this one's the left side, and then this one will be the right side. Now that the tank is bolted in place, what we want to do is reconnect our fuel line. All right, we're ready to now make our connections for the tank wires. Connect these two together, it's your two remaining, the gray ones. They will snap down here where it says gray. Lay those wires out. Connect your tube right here on the side. You just press together. It'll press all the way in until you get to the second bump up here. Feed the vent hose back down just the way you brought it up, and you will need to make a zip tie connection down at the bottom where you originally cut it. Be sure to include the other wires that you did cut out of that bundle. You can now put your side cover back on. Two tabs on top, one on the bottom. Usually easier to start with the bottom one first. And it just presses on. You'll hear it pop in place. All right, now that we got the tank connected, it's time to put the seat on. Fairly easy. Lay it down in the front, hook it on the notch, push forward, lay it down, line up the screw hole in the rear. Number 2 Phillips screw to hold the seat back in. Now we got the seat on, we got to put the strap back on. Basically what you do is you swing it over, strap tucks into this little slot right here. This screw has a lock washer plus an extra washer. Make sure the washer, that's the part that's going to make contact with the strap. All right, now that we got the seat on, I'm going to go ahead and put the bag back on. Let's line up the tab on the rear and bolt it back in place. All right, now that we got the back all buttoned up, let's go ahead and get this front prepared to get the fairing back on. Now remember at the very beginning when we took the TCU out, we had all these extra wires and stuff that came out. These are wires that are not being used on this bike, so what we're going to do is there's a nice little spot here on the left-hand side. We're going to fold the wires over and tuck them in there. All right, what that leaves is the TCU, and you're wondering how you're going to relocate this. So what you'll do is just the way it was mounted up here, we're going to take this, put a strip of Velcro across it, and it'll mount on the inner fairing when we go to put the fairing back in. And it'll basically stay suspended right here. Once you've got your pods reconnected with all their screws, don't forget to put your 12-volt accessory wire back in. Just line it up like this in a straight up and down position, and it'll just slide right onto the connector, like so. When we first took the pods off, there's a couple of connectors that we pulled with the panel tool. We need to make sure we press those back into the pod so they're secure. 2 on this side, and there's going to be 2 on this side. Let's get all those back on there. So we got a stripper Velcro. Basically what we're going to do is we're going to put it on the high part of the TCU. There's a little bump up right here, so we're just going to put it right across that. Just like so. Then when we go to put it in the fairing, we're going to go and peel this off and attach it to the inner fairing as we're putting the fairing back on.
After reattaching your pods, don't forget to plug in your gauges.
All right, prior to the fairing, we just got to remember to put our upper vent back on. This just kind of slides in place from underneath. Just position it. And it'll just swing up and click in place. 2 T27s holding them in on the sides. All right, now we're going to put the fairing back on. A couple connections here. We got to do the headlights. High beams go on the lower one. Low beams go on the upper. And then the TCU. So the TCU, you'll swing back around just the way it came off. And you're going to basically stick it down here on the bottom of the fairing, just above the headlight area, about 1 inch back from the very front pocket of the fairing. And the Velcro will hold it in place. Once you've got the fairing lined up, to hold it in place while you're doing the other screws, put the center windshield screw in place, just to have it hold it there temporarily, and so your fairing doesn't slip off. All right, so once you got the 4 screws on the back of the fairing in place, you can go ahead and pull this screw back out, slightly tilt the fairing forward, and then we can get our windshield in place. The windshield has a couple notches in it. You'll feel it once it sets in place, and then we'll go ahead and put all the screws back in to hold it down. All right, guys, that's it for the install on this 2020 Streetglide. Basically, you saw how to put on a PSM and an MPAK. If you got any questions on this install or any of our products, visit us at arcaudio.com or give us a call at 209-543-8706. We'll see you next time.